Thomas Pierce. I'm with the Kentucky Center for Agriculture and Rural Development, and I'm here with Ryan Fenwick, who's an attorney, and we're discussing limited cooperative associations, or LCAs, how they're different from traditional co-ops, and kind of the ins and outs of LCAs. So Ryan, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and tell us how your work relates to co-ops and LCAs specifically.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you. I'm Ryan Fenwick. I'm a Louisville attorney. I've had the privilege of working with several cooperatives here in Louisville. Part of my legal practice here at Law Office of Ryan Fenwick is I work with nonprofits, cooperatives, and mission-driven limited liability companies. So I've gotten to meet a lot of people with great ideas who really want to change the way that business is done, to make a fairer economy. And that's one of the things I'm most excited about in my legal practice.
Gotcha. So just jumping straight in, what is an LCA and how did LCAs originate?
An LCA is a limited cooperative association. LCAs have a long history, but not nearly as long a history as the cooperative movement. The way that limited cooperative associations started is that as the cooperative movement became more and more successful and more ambitious with the kinds of cooperatives it was trying to start, it became necessary to be able to raise larger and larger amounts of money to finance bigger and bigger businesses. When I was starting out practicing, one of the big projects in the not-for-profit cooperative ecosystem was financing a grocery store. And I mean, it was a multi-million-dollar project. So what was important was that in addition to people being able to buy memberships in the grocery store where they could actually purchase, say cereal or produce from the grocery store, in addition to that, some people needed to be able to put in money at a higher level than what the average grocery shopper was going to be able to afford to pay for a membership. So that's exactly what limited cooperative associations are for. LCAs are designed so that you can take this great cooperative business structure, but you can actually add in the flexibility of being able to get investor members of it. What it gradually evolved to, though, as state legislatures got a hold of, this idea of what's called a next generation cooperative, a cooperative where investors can take a stake in cooperatives so you can raise more money for it. As these next generation cooperatives started to become part of statutory law in state legislatures, what you started to see was this kind of exciting, from the perspective of legal practitioners, development where the cooperative structure started to take on the flexibility of a limited liability company. I won't go into great depth with it, but the original cooperatives started out being like corporations. Now, a lot of people listening to this are going to be familiar with how nonprofit organizations run, with the traditional board structure and the meetings and the minutes and, like the formal votes on discrete tasks and usually you hire a director or a manager to handle, kind of like day-to-day operations. A lot of that formality is stripped out when you work in a limited liability company. In a limited liability company, there's quite a bit more flexibility about how you can set up the individual, how you can set up the moving parts of your business. A lot of what used to be in the state law has been given to the business developer or the founders of the business so that they can create whatever rules they think are going to suit them best in their operating documents. A limited cooperative association has that same trait. It's more flexible than a traditional cooperative because it allows the members to make kind of more nuanced decisions about how the cooperative is going to run. Another thing that is very beneficial about a limited cooperative association for a lot of new cooperatives is that, like a limited liability company, I'm going to give a disclaimer here. This is not specific legal advice, and you need to talk to an attorney before you start really any business, but especially before you start a limited cooperative association, and especially before you start to work around complicated wage and hour, labor laws, and tax laws. But in a limited cooperative association, typically you can elect to be taxed like you would with a limited liability company, which means that you're not paying taxes at the corporate level and then again when it's dispersed to the individual members. Instead, you're only paying taxes at the member level. So that's one benefit of a limited cooperative association that arguably could be more tricky with a cooperative. Again, talk to an accountant. So that's one benefit. And another benefit that's more meaningful for a lot of founders actually starting a cooperative on the ground is that typically, and now this is state by state, but typically in a limited cooperative association, as long as it's small and as long as everyone's participating meaningfully in the decision making of the cooperative, then you are exempt from both wage and hour and workers' compensation insurance. Now, this has to be carefully laid out in your bylaws, and it's really important that you get that part right, or you'll end up being fined. But the reality is that can be an important economic boon for a cooperative, even though eventually, obviously, cooperative members need to be making more than minimum wage, and eventually, cooperative members need even better insurance than will have even better than workers' compensation insurance as they become profitable and benefit from their business. But those I would say are that's a very brief history of the limited cooperative association and its sort of usefulness for people actually doing the work in the community.
Gotcha. So I guess that kind of leads into when does it make more sense for a group to form a traditional co-op or an LCA? What kind of delineates and helps you make that decision of which model makes more sense?
I encourage all of the cooperatives that have come to me so far have been examples of businesses that benefit from the limited cooperative association. So typically, a cooperative is going to benefit from the greater flexibility of the limited cooperative association statute, even if they don't plan to take advantage of some of its greater flexibilities. It might work a lot like a cooperative, but I think a business is going to appreciate the ability to use the modern statute with its thorough rules about its thorough default rules about cooperative governance. I think that is helpful for cooperatives on the scale all the way from a coffee shop to a grocery store. Whether you have investor members or whether you only have the people actually doing the day-to-day business of the cooperative, and there's only 5 of you and there's not much money involved. A reason that you would not use a limited cooperative association could have to do with how you are financing the cooperative, and it is also going to be idiosyncratic based on state law. So as a good example, in Kentucky, you might start an agricultural cooperative because that agricultural cooperative is going to be exempt from Kentucky state laws that allow you to finance the company by selling shares. Now, again, talk to a lawyer. Do not sell shares after you watch a 20-minute video. Okay. But the idea is if you start an agricultural cooperative and you plan on selling shares to people in your community, immediately around you, and you don't sell any out of state, you may find that an agricultural cooperative is the correct entity choice because it might allow, the people most directly impacted by this agricultural cooperative, it might allow them to actually take a financial stake in it, even if it doesn't make sense for them to be members. So typically, almost every cooperative I'm going to encourage to be a limited cooperative association that comes to me is the short answer, but there are some special cases.
Sure. So I'm wondering if you could go a little bit more into decision making and control in an LCA, how decisions are made, who has that control?
In a limited cooperative association, 99.9% of the time, you are going to find that a limited cooperative association makes decisions exactly like any cooperative. It's going to be one member, one vote. And, and even moreover, a lot of cooperatives are going to be of a modest size with few members. And so you're going to find that everyone is directly represented on the board, meaning they are physically on the board that makes the decisions for the cooperative. A slightly more complex structure, you end up with a board of directors, that really does resemble, how a corporation or how a nonprofit would run. And that board is going to make the big decisions, and they're going to delegate authority. They might even delegate decisions to a manager, and then they just become responsible for supervising the manager and making sure the money is, making sure they're doing their fiduciary duty to make sure that no one's stealing money or that the investments the cooperative's making are reasonable. It could become more complicated in a limited cooperative association, though. Part of the flexibility is to allow in investor members. What happens then is you end up with a structure where you have various votes from various classes of member. Now, that sounds really complicated in the abstract, but it could be a little bit more simple if you actually look at, something that might make more sense. Let's say you might have a grain cooperative where most of the members are going to be farmers who put grain into the grain cooperative, to achieve whatever ends that they wanted the grain cooperative for, let's say storage. If you have these members and they're who you would think of as the patrons, they're the core members, the people who really, really benefit from the cooperative. But it's really expensive to make the silos that they need to store their grain. So they've brought in investor members. So now you have a two-class cooperative. You have farmers and you have investors. Now the farmers are going to vote on they're going to make nearly every decision for the cooperative. But you're going to find it more appealing to investors if they have veto powers over certain major decisions. For example, it may be in the interest of the farmers to sell the cooperative, while it may not be in the interest of the investors to sell the cooperative. One decision that is frequently delegated to an investor class of members, if there is one, is the investor class of members would typically want a veto authority over major decisions like selling the cooperative or like merging the cooperative with another cooperative, or completely changing the purpose, and that would make sense because they've invested the money. They don't want to see it immediately transformed into something that they may not think is a good investment. So that's how decisions are made in a cooperative, and it can be in a limited cooperative association, and it can become very nuanced. But the average person thinking of starting a cooperative really does need to start with the basics. Your decision-making process needs to match what you're trying to do. If you're trying to run a lawn care business, you really don't need to start by making an extensive membership structure for that business. You need to start with just the people who are going to mow the lawns, just the people who are going to work, and they need to hammer out they need to hammer out how they practically are going to sit down and exercise their one person, one vote authority over their limited cooperative association.
Gotcha. So kind of moving forward from that, what do bylaws look like for LCAs? What needs to go into those? What are the considerations there?
Bylaws for a limited cooperative association are unique compared to the bylaws for older cooperatives because they are drafted against the backdrop of a thorough state statute. In practically every state, there is going to be a state statute that allows for a limited cooperative association. When you're drafting the bylaws of your limited cooperative association, you really will benefit from, again, full disclosure, I'm an attorney that works with cooperatives, but I do fully believe that anyone starting a limited cooperative association is going to benefit from working with legal counsel, because you are working in this backdrop where you have a rather lengthy state statute. Now, most people who set up cooperatives are are not going to need to personally be familiar with that statute. What they're going to need to know is, okay, what are we going to do? What is our business? How do we want to make money on it? How do we want to share the money? How much money are we going to distribute versus how much are we going to retain in the business? And the biggest decision when people decide to start a cooperative is they need to decide who they're going to cooperate with and how they're going to cooperate in the very beginning of it. After that, you come to an attorney and you start to work out the nuances of exactly how you're going to pay yourself, exactly how you're going to account for it. And these big questions, how you're going to pay yourself, how you're going to make decisions, these are the questions that are answered in the bylaws. The bylaws of a limited cooperative association are basically just the ground rules for how a cooperative works, how the members are going to come together to make decisions. Typically, what you're going to find is that a normal decision for the cooperative, kind of an everyday decision, could be made with, just 50% plus one. But some decisions, such as kicking a member out of the cooperative for whatever reason, that might come up. That's going to require a supermajority vote. You may find that certain decisions, and so you need to make sure that all of these decisions that you're going to find in the future of your cooperative have been set forth in your bylaws so that you can make sure that when complex situations arrive in the years and years that your cooperative is going to be running, that you're going to have a pretty good idea of, like who's going to take the vote on it, what the margin's going to be for that vote, and how you know who won the vote. So that's what goes in the bylaws. In addition, it's important with a limited cooperative association, because of the increased flexibility, it's important to make sure that you seek out a tax professional who's going to make sure that the bylaws provision match your taxation expectations. What's going to be really important about that is that the IRS needs when the IRS looks at a business, they need the bylaws to match federal tax law, and they need it to match the way the members of a cooperative are actually receiving their money from that cooperative. So that's another part. That's another important part of what gets set out in the cooperative, are those sort of financial and accounting provisions.
Right. So I'm wondering if you could kind of just speak to, from what you've seen with LCAs, what are some successes or things to avoid in terms of those considering forming, that could help those considering forming an LCA?
The biggest thing when considering forming an LCA is to keep it simple. People have an intuitive sense of what it takes to run a business. The people who are attracted to, even spending the time to think about getting this started, and, even talking with people they may want to work with. That's really the hard work, is actually making the business run. The structure of a limited cooperative association, just like the structure of any business, follows the goals of the founders, follow the purpose of the business. So the most common mistake that I see people founding limited cooperative associations make is they take a long, there'll be this kind of exploratory period where you end up kind of losing the momentum of it in, too many meetings, like too many kind of exploratory efforts with it. Once you decide that this is what you want to do, once you have a core team, it's time to go to an attorney, it's time to go to an accountant, it's time to go to people, such as yourself at KCARD, and it's time to, work out, is my business idea viable? And once you've set that up, and once you have the members, it's really just a matter of getting competent legal and tax professionals to help you make sure that your documents are going to help you meet your expectations as far as how you're going to be taxed, as far as how you're going to comply with labor and wage laws. So that's what I would say is the biggest problem that people setting up limited cooperative associations run into is, you know, is not keeping it really grounded in what the outcome of the discussion needs to be, you know, which is starting the business. The other big problem, which is much more out of control of the founders of a cooperative, is it is very hard to come up with financing for any business, you know, but the larger the dream, the more startup capital it's going to take to get a cooperative off the ground, the harder it's going to be for founders to actually go out into the community and find the money. When you need a lot of money, you ultimately end up needing a more complicated structure, which gets back to, you know, the first problem I discussed. You know, you need more meetings to find more startup capital for a cooperative, you know, because you have to involve a large swath of the community. So I would say that running into the difficulty of finding financing is probably the second big problem that people trying to found a limited cooperative association run into.
Right. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your expertise in answering these questions. Thank you for watching. I hope you've gained something from this video. And again, thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.